of the road. Authorities have opened shelters and have ordered more than 1,700 people to leave immediately. They say almost 800 structures are threatened. This area is called Leilani Estates, located on the eastern part of Hawaii's Big Island. Mount Kilauea is one of the world's most active volcanoes. It sent huge plumes of smoke into the sky after hundreds of earthquakes shook the area in the last week. Let's get more now from Scott Rowland. Scott's a professor of geology and geophysics at the University of Hawaii, and he joins us now from Honolulu. Thanks, Scott, for joining us. I mean, my goodness, 100 people, 1,700 people to leave immediately, 800 structures threatened. Tell us about how dangerous or potentially dangerous this situation is.
I think it's not super dangerous, mainly because people had a pretty good warning over the last few days of almost constant earthquake. And then yesterday afternoon, some cracks opened up in one of the roads in that same subdivision. And additionally, that same part of the Big Island was threatened with lava flows only about 3.5 years ago. So the people are well aware of potential dangers, and certainly in the last few days, they knew for sure that something was possible.
And tell us about that warning, how they knew that.
Well, starting Monday afternoon, when earthquakes began to move towards this particular part of the Big Island, the civil defense officials were alerted by the Volcano Observatory staff, and they started putting out notices to people that they should be prepared to evacuate if necessary. And as those earthquakes became more numerous, and certainly once the cracks opened up on the road, civil defense basically told people, we don't know exactly when or even if an eruption will happen, but we think it's possible, and therefore you should be prepared to leave at relatively short notice if necessary. And I think most people, again, because of their experience with other disasters, were well prepared to do so.
We can see the lava coming up through the street there as you talk at these estates. Is that typical? Seeing it come up through the streets like that?
Well, certainly it's not typical for it to erupt in the middle of a subdivision. That has not happened, hasn't come out of the ground in a subdivision for a long time in Hawaii. But certainly for the beginning stages of a new eruption, having material thrown out of a crack in the ground, that is definitely typical.
Do we specifically know what caused Kilauea this time to erupt?
No, I should say that Kilauea has been erupting essentially constantly since January of 1983. And this is merely a new phase of that same eruption. But your question is a good one. Do we know why all of a sudden the magma has decided to migrate down the rift zone 20 miles or so and erupt in this new location? And the answer is no. We don't know why that happened.
Well, danger aside, what kind of things do you learn from Kilauea when it has an eruption of this magnitude?
People can learn all kinds of things. Everything from the composition of the lavas that are being erupted. Have they mixed with magma that's been down in the rift zone for decades, for example? How much gas is in the magma? To how lava flows on the surface through a forested area. I don't know yet, actually, if lava flows are moving very far away from the eruptive fissure. But certainly if the eruption continues, they will. And understanding where lava goes and how fast it goes is another important aspect of volcanology, particularly for understanding hazards.
Well, we thank you for your expertise and for joining us, Scott Rowland. We'll be watching what happens next. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome. Aloha.
For more on the volcanic activity happening in Hawaii, our other expert, Ivan Cabrera.
I am so glad you asked him that question. Good to see you, Natalie. As far as, like, is this typical? Do you normally see lava flows like that in a neighborhood?
Yeah.
Because I hadn't seen something like that. On Main Street, all of a sudden you have lava spewing out in a residential neighborhood, which is why we have the evacuation. So certainly is the call you don't want to get at work, right? We're evacuating your home because we've got lava. Although, of course, you know, these are Hawaiians. These are volcanic islands. This is what you would expect, except for the fact that that doesn't happen quite often. Now, the threat, and you made a great point there, as far as life-threatening situation, it isn't, because we have so much lead time. The 200 or so earthquakes that occurred, letting us know that Kilauea was up to something, and then the 5.0 earthquake that certainly partially collapsed the crater there that we have been seeing with drone footage. And that, of course, is the flow that has been threatening the estates further to the east. There's the crater there. And in fact, I'm seeing some Google pictures of folks getting right in there. And this is a huge crater there, not completely collapsed, but partially. And that has been enough to get to some of the flow popping up across Leilani Estates. That's the area that 1,700 people or so are under potential for evacuation. We understand hundreds have already been evacuated. So let's kind of break it down for you here. It's a bit confusing for some of us, especially if we don't live there. They have different alerts, right? They have watches, kind of like what we have with typhoons or things like that. Well, warning is the highest level, and that's where we're at now. Obviously, the event is underway. Aviation alerts have been posted as well. That 5.0 earthquake was what was responsible. We fly in here, and upwards of 1,700 people are now under very close monitoring by the Civil Defense in Hawaii there, in case they do have to suddenly get more folks out of the way. By the way, ahead of this event, thousands of hectares had already been assigned off limits because of the potential eruption here. So it's something that we're going to continue to watch, but it continues to develop. And I've been refreshing the volcanology page from Hawaii just to see if we get any additional updates as far as any more fissures that have the possibility to kind of pop up, because that entire zone that I showed you there, we understand has the potential to have some vents, which is not something you want to see. So it's happening in the Leilani Estates, but it could pop up in other regions. Unlikely, but that's a potential. So they're monitoring the whole area very closely, as you would understand, in case we need to get people out of the way. But lots of leeway time. That's certainly a good thing.
The folks that have already been evacuated, any word on how long they'll have to stay away?
At this point, it looks like it's going to be several days until the earthquakes kind of start. And you don't see the lava coming spewing out of the ground there, but I think it's going to be some time before folks get back in there, and hopefully we won't have significant structure damage as well, but less concerned about folks because they're getting